Let me tell you something most people never learn. When you stop explaining yourself, when you stop chasing closure, when you finally step back in silence, that's when the truth gets loud. Not your words, not your tears, not your sacrifices, your absence. Detachment isn't weakness. It's discipline. It's the moment you realize that begging for understanding from someone committed to misunderstanding you is a losing game. You don't detach to punish him. You detach to protect your peace. Because while you were showing up with loyalty, patience, and love, he was busy taking you for granted. And people don't value what they believe will always be there. Detachment reveals your value because constant availability creates an illusion of permanence. When someone believes you will always be there, always forgiving, always understanding, always adjusting, they stop seeing your presence as a privilege and start treating it like a guarantee. Human nature has a quiet flaw. We protect what we fear losing, not what we assume will stay. When you were showing up every time, answering every call, fixing every problem, your effort blended into the background of his life. It wasn't that you lacked value. It was that your value was hidden by your consistency. Detachment removes that illusion. The moment you step back, the comfort he built around your presence collapses, and suddenly what felt ordinary becomes irreplaceable. When you detach, you interrupt the emotional economy you created. You were giving more than you were receiving emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And imbalance became normal. Detachment shifts the weight. Now he has to sit with the absence of your reassurance, your patience, your emotional labor. He begins to notice how much you carried that he never acknowledged. The encouragement you gave when no one else believed in him. The calm you brought into chaos. The stability you provided without asking for applause. Detachment doesn't invent value. It exposes the value that was already there but ignored. Loss sharpens perception. What once felt small becomes massive when it's no longer available. Your absence forces comparison, and comparison breeds clarity. When you are gone, he measures every interaction against what you used to provide. Other voices don't sound like yours. Other support doesn't feel as steady. Other connections don't offer the same depth. Detachment removes the distraction of your presence and leaves behind a quiet realization. Not everyone loves with the same consistency. Not everyone stays patient under pressure. Not everyone chooses loyalty when things get difficult. In stepping away, you allow him to experience the difference between convenience and commitment. And that difference teaches lessons that words never could. Detachment also strips away entitlement. When you were always there, he unconsciously felt entitled to your energy, your time, your understanding. He didn't have to earn it, it just arrived. Detachment breaks that pattern. It reintroduces effort, accountability, and awareness. He begins to understand that access to you was not a right. It was a privilege he failed to protect. This realization can be uncomfortable, even painful, because it forces him to confront how casually he treated something rare. Detachment doesn't humiliate, it humbles. It replaces comfort with consequence and forces a reevaluation of what was lost through neglect. Most importantly, detachment restores your value to yourself. While he is realizing what you meant to him, you are remembering what you mean to you. You stop measuring your worth by his attention or validation. You see how much you poured out without receiving the same care in return. Detachment gives you perspective. You were not asking for too much. You were offering more than enough. In reclaiming your energy, your boundaries, and your peace, you stand in your value fully, whether he recognizes it or not. And that shift changes everything, because value that is recognized internally no longer depends on being acknowledged externally. Silence becomes a mirror because it removes the noise that once protected him from accountability. When you were speaking, explaining, defending, and reacting, your voice gave him something to push against. Arguments distracted him from self-reflection. Your emotions became the focus instead of his actions. Silence changes that dynamic completely. With no words to twist and no reactions to provoke, he is left alone with his thoughts. In that quiet space, the truth has nowhere to hide. Silence doesn't accuse, yet it exposes. It reflects his behavior back to him without commentary, forcing him to confront what he did rather than how he justified it. When you stop speaking, he starts replaying moments he once dismissed. Conversations he ignored resurface. Boundaries you tried to set suddenly make sense. Your tone, your expressions, your pauses, things he overlooked, return with clarity. Silence gives memory power. Without your presence to soften the impact of his choices, he begins to feel the weight of them. What once seemed insignificant now echoes loudly. Silence slows time, and in that slowdown, reflection begins. He can no longer escape into distraction or denial because there is nothing external demanding his attention. The mirror is steady, and it doesn't blink. Silence also removes the ability to rewrite the story. When you were explaining yourself, he could interrupt, reinterpret, or minimize your experience. Your words gave him opportunities to shift blame or avoid responsibility. Silence shuts that door. With no new narrative coming from you, the only story left is the one created by his actions. He sees patterns instead of isolated incidents. He recognizes how often you were the one trying to fix things, how often you carried emotional weight he refused to acknowledge. Silence doesn't argue facts, it presents them intact. And facts, when left undisturbed, are difficult to deny. In the absence of your voice, emotions he avoided begin to surface. Guilt, regret, confusion, and longing rise without resistance. Silence gives these feelings space to breathe. When you were present, your reassurance may have buffered him from discomfort. Your patience may have delayed his growth. Silence removes that cushion. Now, every unanswered message, every moment of quiet, becomes an invitation to self-examination. He begins to understand that your emotional responses were not overreactions, but signals he chose to ignore. The mirror shows him not just what he lost, but why he lost it. Silence reflects your strength as well. By choosing not to engage, you demonstrate control rather than indifference. Silence says you trust the truth to speak for itself. It shows maturity, restraint, and confidence in your own reality. You are no longer trying to be understood by someone unwilling to listen. That decision alone shifts the power dynamic. While he is forced inward, you are moving forward. Silence becomes proof that you don't need validation to stand firm in your truth. And in that reflection, he sees something undeniable. Your quiet was never weakness, it was clarity. Detachment is self-respect because it marks the moment you stop negotiating your worth. For a long time, you may have stayed longer than you should have, hoping your patience would eventually be recognized and returned. You tolerated behaviors that didn't align with your values because you believed understanding and loyalty would inspire change. But self-respect begins when you realize that love should not require self-abandonment. Detachment is not an emotional shutdown. It is a conscious decision to stop offering access to someone who repeatedly mishandled it. In choosing distance, you choose dignity over desperation. When you detach, you end the cycle of over-giving and under-receiving. You stop pouring energy into explanations that go unheard and efforts that go unappreciated. Self-respect doesn't demand reciprocity, it expects it. Detachment enforces that expectation without confrontation. You no longer chase acknowledgement or wait for apologies that may never come. Instead, you redirect that energy inward. You protect your time, your emotions, and your mental clarity. This shift may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you were conditioned to equate love with endurance, but discomfort is often the first sign of growth. Detachment also restores your boundaries, especially the ones that were quietly crossed. Boundaries aren't walls meant to punish, they are lines that preserve your well-being. When those lines are ignored repeatedly, self-respect requires action, not discussion. Detachment becomes the boundary when words have lost their power. It communicates what explanations failed to convey, that your limits matter. You stop proving how much you can tolerate and start honoring how much you deserve. In doing so, you redefine the standard for how you expect to be treated, not just by him, but by everyone moving forward. Self-respect through detachment teaches you to sit with your emotions instead of chasing relief through validation. You allow yourself to feel the sadness, the disappointment, and even the grief of what you hoped things could be. But you no longer seek comfort from the very source of your pain. That restraint is strength. It requires discipline to walk away from familiarity, even when it hurts. Detachment is choosing long-term peace over short-term reassurance. It is understanding that healing does not come from being chosen again by someone who already showed you how they choose. As attachment deepens, your self-perception changes. You begin to see yourself not as someone who was too much or not enough, but as someone who was misaligned with a situation that could not meet your depth. Self-respect clarifies that truth. You stop internalizing rejection and start recognizing incompatibility. Detachment frees you from the need to be understood by someone who never truly listened. In that freedom, you reclaim your confidence, your clarity, and your sense of self quietly, firmly, and without apology. Your absence rewrites the narrative because it removes you from the role you were unfairly assigned. When you were present, reacting, explaining, and trying to fix what was breaking, it was easy for the story to be distorted. Your emotions became the headline instead of his behavior. Your reactions were labeled as the problem, while the causes were quietly ignored. Presence gave room for misinterpretation. Absence takes that room away. When you step back, the story loses its convenient scapegoat. There is no longer a voice to blame, no reaction to point at, no emotion to dismiss. What remains is a clear, unfiltered record of actions and consequences. Without you there to soften reality, patterns become impossible to deny. In your presence, each issue could be framed as a misunderstanding or a one-time mistake. In your absence, repetition becomes obvious. The same behaviors lead to the same outcomes, and the common denominator is no longer you. Your absence forces the narrative to shift from things went wrong to choices were made. That shift is powerful because it replaces confusion with accountability. He may not admit it out loud, but internally the story changes. He begins to see that your effort was not the problem. It was the glue holding things together. Your absence also removes emotional manipulation from the narrative. When you were there, guilt, charm, excuses, or temporary change could reset the story just enough to keep you engaged. Your compassion may have given endless second chances, allowing the narrative to stay unresolved. Absence ends that cycle. There are no more conversations to steer, no emotions to manage, no opportunities to pull you back in before real responsibility is taken. The narrative becomes still, and in that stillness, truth settles. What was once blurred by emotion becomes sharp with clarity. As the story rewrites itself, your role transforms. You are no longer seen as the one who complained too much, asked for too much, or cared too deeply. Instead, you become the one who tried, who stayed longer than necessary, who gave without matching return. This realization often arrives late, but it arrives honestly. Absence reframes your intentions and your actions. It reveals that you weren't difficult. You were discerning, you weren't demanding, you were honest. You weren't unstable. You were responding to instability. The narrative corrects itself when you are no longer there to carry its weight. Most importantly, your absence allows you to rewrite the narrative for yourself. You stop telling the story through the lens of what went wrong and start seeing it through the lens of what you learned. You no longer center the experience around loss, but around clarity. Absence gives you authorship again. You decide how the story ends, how it's remembered, and how it informs your future. You are no longer a character reacting to someone else's choices. You become the one who chose peace, self-respect, and forward motion. And that rewritten narrative doesn't need validation to be true. Growth happens away from chaos because constant emotional turbulence leaves no room for clarity. When you are surrounded by inconsistency, mixed signals, and unresolved conflict, your energy is spent surviving rather than evolving. You are always responding, always adapting, always bracing for the next disruption. In that state, self-reflection becomes impossible. Detachment removes you from the storm. Distance quiets the noise, and in that quiet, you finally hear your own thoughts again. Growth doesn't thrive in confusion. It requires stillness, space, and the safety to think without interruption. Away from chaos, you begin to see how much of yourself was shaped by reaction instead of intention. You notice habits you develop just to keep the peace, over-explaining, minimizing your needs, or anticipating disappointment before it arrived. These behaviors weren't flaws, they were survival strategies. Detachment allows you to gently dismantle them. With space, you ask better questions. Why did I accept this? Why did I stay silent here? Why did I doubt myself there? Growth begins the moment you stop blaming yourself and start understanding yourself. That understanding is impossible when you are constantly pulled back into emotional disorder. Distance also reveals your capacity. When you are no longer managing someone else's moods, problems, or expectations, your energy returns to you. You discover how capable you are when your focus is no longer divided. You make clearer decisions, trust your instincts more, and move with intention instead of urgency. Chaos demanded reaction. Detachment invites direction. Growth feels steadier here. It's not loud or dramatic, but it is consistent. Each day, you become more aligned with who you are rather than who you needed to be to survive the situation. As you grow, your standards evolve. What once felt acceptable now feels misaligned. You begin to recognize early signs of chaos and no longer feel obligated to tolerate them. Growth sharpens discernment. You learn that peace is not boring, it is productive. Stability is not dull, it is fertile ground. Detachment teaches you that love should feel supportive, not destabilizing. And this lesson doesn't harden you, it refines you. You don't close off, you become selective. You don't withdraw, you choose wisely. Growth away from chaos also reshapes your confidence. You stop needing external reassurance because you trust the work you are doing internally. You see progress in how you respond, how you choose, and how you protect your peace. Detachment becomes the space where you rebuild, not into someone colder, but into someone clearer. You no longer mistake intensity for depth or chaos for passion. Growth teaches you the difference, and once you learn it, you never unlearn it. Realization often arrives late because comfort delays awareness. When you were present, your consistency softened the consequences of his choices. Your patience absorbed the impact of his neglect. Your loyalty gave him time he didn't earn. As long as you were there, life didn't demand reflection from him. It allowed avoidance. Realization requires contrast, and contrast only appears when something familiar disappears. When you detach, the gap you leave behind becomes undeniable. Only then does he begin to recognize what your presence truly meant, not in theory, but in lived experience. At first, The realization is subtle. It shows up as confusion, as an unsettled feeling he can't quite name. He reaches for the comfort you once provided and finds silence instead. Situations that once felt manageable now feel heavier. Decisions that once came easily now feel uncertain. Slowly, he connects the dots. He remembers how you supported him without needing to be asked, how you stood firm when things fell apart, how you believed in him even when he doubted himself. These realizations don't come with pride, they come with regret because they are rooted in absence. As time passes, realization deepens into accountability. He begins to understand that your detachment wasn't sudden or cruel, it was earned. He recalls moments when you tried to communicate, moments when you gave warnings disguised as honesty, moments when you asked for effort instead of perfection. What once sounded like complaints now reveals itself as clarity he ignored. Realization forces him to confront the truth that you didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you cared enough not to lose yourself. This understanding can be painful because it exposes missed opportunities that cannot be revisited. Realization also brings comparison, and comparison sharpens regret. Every new interaction is measured against the standard you set without trying. Others may offer attention, but not understanding. Others may show interest, but not commitment. He begins to see that what you gave was not common. It was intentional. Your emotional depth, your consistency, your integrity stand out only after they are gone. Realization teaches him that rare things are often recognized too late, not because they weren't valuable, but because they were misunderstood. While his realization unfolds, something equally important is happening elsewhere. You are changing. His understanding does not arrive in time to save the connection, because detachment has already done its work. The lesson reaches him when access is no longer available. Realization comes, but it does not reverse growth. It does not restore what was lost. It simply stands as proof that your worth was real all along, even if it took absence for him to finally see it. Here is a strong, composed, and impactful ending that matches the tone and depth of the entire speech. Grounded, reflective, and resolute, without sounding bitter or dramatic. Detachment doesn't ask for revenge, and it doesn't wait for validation. It stands quietly in truth. It allows people to learn what they refused to understand when you were present. By stepping back, you didn't lose yourself. You found yourself. You didn't disappear, you realigned. And in that realignment, everything became clear. Some lessons are only learned through absence. Some truths only surface when silence replaces explanation. Detachment becomes the final teacher, not because it hurts, but because it is honest. It reveals what mattered, what was taken for granted, and what could not be sustained. And while realization may arrive for him in hindsight, for you it arrives in clarity. You move forward no longer needing to be seen, understood, or chosen by someone who couldn't meet you where you stood. Detachment did its job. It showed him who you really were, and it reminded you of who you've always been.